But I'd like to tell you why we think, from our point of view, what you did was historic. For the following 5 reasons. The first reason, it's a right. And this right has waited 67 years. This right should have been fulfilled and granted to the Palestinians in 1947. Exactly when there was a United Nations resolution to divide our land without even consulting us. The international community should have granted our birthright of self-determination. Rights of self-determination should never and is never part of a negotiation process. It's not an outcome of a process. It's a natural right. A friend of mine in Ramallah, she is half British, half Palestinian. I asked her on the day of vote, when we won the vote, and by the way, even I didn't expect that overwhelming. You know, we were on the phone discussing, but 274 against 12 surprised me. But I asked her what she felt, and she had one word to say. She said, late. And you know, half British was really that British side of her. She said late doesn't mean that she doesn't acknowledge it or want it, but she means that it should have come a bit earlier. So it is a right, and I received a letter from Ed Miliband, the chairman, the head of the opposition, the head of the Labour Party, and in that letter he stated very clearly the first line that Labour supported the motion and supported the vote because recognizing the state of Palestine is a right, not a favor or a gift. But the second reason is it's good for peace. I'm hearing all this argument about unilateralism. It's good for peace, it's good for the two-state solution, it's good for any future bilateral track with the Israelis. Because we have learned it the hard way over the last 21 years. I mean, you never negotiate the principles. What you negotiate is the modalities for implementing the principles, and that was lacking. The issue of recognition and self-determination for Palestinians was left for Israel to decide. It's almost like giving the key to the wolf, the key to the lamb's freedom, giving it to the wolf. That was a bad choice. And recognition would help, in my opinion, increase the chances when we are ready to go back to a genuine, meaningful peace process, of a process that is much more genuine and has a chances of success. Because recognition would by itself and by default provide us with all that was missing in the previous peace process. Recognition was missing. Nobody recognized us, including Israel. We recognized Israel, but you know, Andy, there was no reciprocal recognition. Borders were not definite in that peace process. The issue of settlements and the expansion was not clear-cut. There was no deadline or timetable, finish line, and the mediation was left for the US. The recognition will alter that dynamic, in my opinion, and it will provide a future negotiated process with a better chance of surviving. And you know, I don't think really the criticism about recognition being unilateral is serious, as you don't think as well. I mean, recognition is unilateral by definition. It's unilateral by the recognizing state. But the idea of recognition is the epitome, is the definition of collective work, is the definition of multilateralism. And you know, we Palestinians have been trying our best to go to the multilateral track, but we are blocked, as you know, by the United States of America. So this is the other route, if you may, to multilateralism, to international system. The third reason is our ability as a Palestinian national movement to provide our people with a credible alternative. You know, the question is not whether we should resist or not. Definitely we must resist. I mean, it's an obligation upon us to resist the occupation, to resist the illegality, to resist the daily theft of our land, to resist the daily murder of our children. It's an obligation upon us and upon you. The question is only about the means of resistance? That's the only question. And here, you have seen a method that Israel provoked during the summer. And we have been trying to provide the Palestinian people with a different alternative that could be effective and can work, which is a peaceful, popular, non-violent resistance. And I think your recognition has given that alternative a lifeline. Like the IRA or the ANC, they would have never adopted non-violence if it was not effective. They only abandoned violence when the alternative became effective and possible and doable. And by the US blocking our route to international diplomacy, international legitimacy, we were unable really to present a credible alternative. The fourth is that recognition is a two-way street. It's not just we are seeking you to recognize a state. We are seeking that you recognize the state. And that brings not only entitlement, but responsibilities upon us. And you cannot be part of the kind and the type of our state unless you recognize it. By recognizing, I believe you might help us building a different kind of state in the Middle East. Something that our people aspire to, want, and they have the historic foundations for it, being a tolerant society and being a diverse society, and having produced such a democratic process, albeit and despite under occupation in 2006. So the fourth factor is really our own responsibilities as Palestinians. When we seek your recognition, effectively, we are also saying that we want to commit to international law, to your own values and principles. And I think it's a good deal. It's a very good deal, given the mayhem in the region, the sectarian mess we are in. To aspire to establish a state based on the ethos of plurality and democracy and inclusivity is a very important task. And the fifth and the last is it's not, the recognition in our opinion is not just about us, the Palestinians, it's also about you. I mean, for almost 70 years, you have been doing well in almost every other place, but Palestine has been the exception, which has dented your principles, dented your systems, dented the international law you have created. I mean, values cannot be subdivided. You cannot pick and choose. And laws are not also subdivided. And I'm sure you've heard about the historic legacies and the historic responsibility of Britain. I'm not going to engage in it, you know what? I'm going to engage in the leadership of Britain and the inspiration Britain could bring to us. I mean, only a few days after your vote, the Irish Senate voted. That was not a coincidence. You do have a leadership role in this region. And the Spanish Parliament is about to vote, I think, this week, the coming few days. This was also not a coincidence. And it has to also do with Britain itself and its own society. I mean, the inclusion and the integration of your own communities. You also need to convince the millions of Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike that diplomacy and international law works. You need to convince them of that, to dissuade them from other venues. And it's a problem here, as you know. So it's about you. And I'm glad it happened at the very right time. So the question comes then, where do we go from here? There was unbinding yet important decision. You know, those who talk about it as symbolic undermine the power of symbolism. We welcome symbolism. Half of what we do is about symbolism, really. Half of what we do now, Abu Ammar Yasser Arafat was all about symbolism. He insisted on the red carpet because he knows the power of symbolism for his own quest sovereignty and independence. So fine, but it's not just symbolic. It was a moment when it has really reflected the will of the British people. And I don't think your government can afford to avert it or avoid it totally. That was such an overwhelming political vote. And I take it, your house is democratic, and I take it, it does represent the will of the British people. 274 against 12, I mean, that was really overwhelming. And with all the discrediting the pro-Israel lobby did about that vote, that was overwhelming. I did not expect it. Yes, the work has just begun, and the journey has just started, but at a very good note, very good starting point. So delighted I was that people now are afraid to argue against the rights of Palestine. What a shift. That is the beginning of a real transformation. And the UK vote was not just about Palestine, in my opinion, but Palestine has just become the dividing line globally between, in general, not only about Palestinian rights, but between, what's the word, between complacency and compassion, between complicity and solidarity, between the force of logic and the logic of force. And I think, by having sided always with the compassion and the solidarity and the logic or the force of logic, universal values, has to do with other issues all around the world. Because I think in the last few decades, Andy, we have lost that edge of our solidarity and compassion and extending hands. But we know that the current government is not going to recognize tomorrow. And we know that because we have elections in May, perhaps no government will take such a decision until they see what happens in the elections. But our work should really focus, in my opinion, from now on the various political parties, because the vote proven that we are cross-party, that these parties adopt the recognition of Palestine as an election platform. We will continue the journey. I believe the journey is going to be long. But what you did on the 13th of October was a major step in that long journey, our own long journey to freedom. Thank you.